Fear is an illusion. Conquer fear. Become free. Buddhist lessons and Zen stories to calm your mind. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at a ceiling they cannot see. Their heart is pounding. Their breath is shallow. Their mind is racing through a labyrinth of terrible possibilities, none of which are happening, most of which will never happen, and all of which feel absolutely, devastatingly real. The room is quiet. The house is still. Nothing is wrong in this moment, not really. But inside that person's skull, a war is being fought against shadows, against phantom enemies, against a future that does not yet exist and may never arrive. And here is the extraordinary thing. That person could be anyone. That person could be you. Fear is the most universal human experience on this planet. It does not care about your bank account, your job title, the country you live in, or the language you speak. It does not discriminate between the powerful and the powerless, the educated and the uneducated, the young and the old. It sits in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies and in the mud-walled homes of rural villages. It whispers to the athlete before the championship game and to the mother watching her child walk to school alone for the first time. It lives in every human heart that has ever beaten, and it has been doing so for as long as our species has walked upright on this fragile, spinning rock. But what if everything you think you know about fear is wrong? What if the thing that has held you captive your entire life, the thing that has kept you from speaking up, from taking risks, from loving fully, from living completely, what if that thing is not what you think it is? What if fear, at its deepest root, is not a fixed reality but a construction of the mind, a projection, a story your brain tells you to keep you small and safe and stuck? More than 2,500 years ago, in the forests and mountains and river valleys of ancient India, a man sat beneath a tree and discovered something that would change the trajectory of human understanding forever. He discovered that fear, like all mental formations, is impermanent. It arises, it persists for a time, and it dissolves. It has no solid core. It has no permanent address. It is, in the most profound and liberating sense of the word, an illusion. Not an illusion in the sense that it is not felt, because it is felt deeply, painfully, sometimes overwhelmingly, but an illusion in the sense that it does not represent reality as it actually is. It represents reality as your conditioned mind imagines it to be. That man was Siddhartha Gautama. The world came to know him as the Buddha, the awakened one. And the tradition he founded, refined over millennia by monks and nuns and teachers and seekers across dozens of cultures, has produced what may be the most sophisticated and practical understanding of fear ever developed by any civilization in human history. Tonight, we are going to walk that path together. We are going to explore what the Buddhist and Zen traditions really teach about fear, not in some abstract, academic way, but in a way that you can feel in your bones, that you can carry with you into the difficult moments of your actual life. We are going to sit with ancient stories that have been passed down from teacher to student for 1,000 years, stories of monks who stared down sword-wielding warriors without flinching, of meditators who sat in dark forests filled with terrifying sounds and found peace instead of panic, of ordinary people who discovered an extraordinary freedom on the other side of their deepest terrors. We're going to look at what modern neuroscience has learned about the fear response in the brain and how meditation physically reshapes the neural architecture responsible for anxiety and dread. We are going to spend time with some of the greatest Buddhist teachers of the 20th and 21st centuries, Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, and others, and hear how they approach their own fears with tenderness, with curiosity, and with a kind of radical acceptance that most of us have never considered. And by the time we reach the end of this journey, you will have in your possession a set of insights and practices that can genuinely, measurably, fundamentally change your relationship with fear, not by eliminating it, Because the Buddhist path is not about suppression or denial, not by fighting it, because the harder you fight fear, the stronger it becomes, but by seeing through it, by understanding what it really is, by recognizing that the cage you have been living in has no lock, and in fact has no walls, and that the only thing keeping you inside was the belief that the cage was real. So settle in, take a breath, let your shoulders drop, let the muscles in your jaw soften. You are safe here. You are safe in this moment. And that, as we are about to discover, is always, always true. Let us begin where all great Buddhist stories begin, with the night the Buddha himself faced the embodiment of fear and won. Picture a warm evening in northern India, roughly 2,500 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine and damp earth. Insects hum in the gathering darkness. A river moves slowly in the distance, catching the last amber light of the setting sun. And beneath a broad-leafed fig tree, a man sits cross-legged on a cushion of wild grass, his back straight, his eyes half closed, his breath slow and steady as the tide. His name is Siddhartha Gautama, and he has been seeking the answer to human suffering for 6 long years. He has studied with the greatest meditation teachers of his time. He has starved himself nearly to death in the practice of extreme asceticism, his ribs pressing against his skin like the bars of a cage, his body reduced to little more than a skeleton draped in flesh. He has tried every path that ancient India had to offer, and none of them have led him to the freedom he seeks. But tonight is different. Tonight, sitting beneath this tree in the town of Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha has made a vow. He has touched the earth with his right hand and declared that he will not rise from this spot until he has penetrated the deepest truth of existence. Even if his flesh withers and his bones crumble to dust, he will not move. He will sit here until he is free, or he will die trying. The universe, it seems, takes such vows seriously. As the darkness deepens and the stars begin to appear, something stirs in the shadows. Not a snake, not a tiger, something far more dangerous than any physical predator. Something that has been waiting for this moment, dreading it, knowing that if Siddhartha succeeds in his quest, the entire architecture of illusion that keeps sentient beings trapped in cycles of suffering will begin to crumble. His name is Mara. In Buddhist cosmology, Mara is not a devil in the Western sense. He is not a fallen angel or an eternal enemy of goodness. He is something more subtle, more pervasive, and in many ways more terrifying. Mara is the personification of everything that keeps us asleep. He is desire. He is distraction. He is doubt. And above all, he is fear. He is the voice in your head that says you are not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy of the freedom you seek. He is the part of you that would rather stay in a familiar prison than risk the unknown territory of liberation. And on this night, Mara comes at Siddhartha with everything he has. First, Mara sends his daughters, 3 beings whose names translate to craving, discontent, and attachment. They dance before Siddhartha in forms of breathtaking beauty, offering pleasures beyond imagination. But Siddhartha does not stir. He has already walked the road of sensory pleasure as a prince in his father's palace. He knows where it leads. It leads nowhere. When seduction fails, Mara turns to force. He summons an army of demons, twisted and terrible, armed with weapons that would make the bravest warrior tremble. They hurl flaming arrows. They rain down boulders. They conjure hurricanes and earthquakes and walls of scorching fire. The very ground shakes beneath the onslaught. The air fills with the sound of war drums and screaming. And Siddhartha does not move. The texts tell us that as these weapons flew toward the seated figure beneath the tree, something remarkable happened. The arrows became flowers. The boulders became garlands. The fire became soft, warm light. Not because Siddhartha used some magical power to deflect them, but because in the presence of his perfect stillness, in the absolute clarity of his awareness, the weapons of fear revealed their true nature. They were empty. They were projections. They were, in the most literal sense, made of nothing. This is the key insight, and we should pause here, because it is the foundation upon which everything else in this exploration rests. The arrows did not fail because Siddhartha was stronger than fear. They failed because Siddhartha could see that fear had no substance. It appeared real. It felt threatening. It came with all the sound and fury of a genuine attack. But at its core, it was a performance, a play of light and shadow, a hallucination projected by a mind that had not yet learned to see clearly. And then came Mara's final assault, the most devastating of all. Having failed with desire and with terror, Mara played his last card. He challenged Siddhartha's right to be sitting there at all. He questioned his worthiness. He whispered the words that have stopped more seekers in their tracks than any army of demons ever could. Who do you think you are? This is the fear that runs deeper than all others. Not the fear of physical harm, not the fear of loss or failure, the fear that you are fundamentally inadequate, the fear that you do not deserve happiness, peace, or freedom. The fear that if people really saw who you are beneath the masks and the performances and the carefully constructed identity, they would turn away in disgust. Siddhartha's response to this final attack is one of the most powerful gestures in all of human spiritual history. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not list his accomplishments or his qualifications. He simply reached down with his right hand and touched the earth. This gesture, known as the Bhumisparsha Mudra, the earth-touching gesture, was his answer to Mara's challenge. He was calling the earth itself as his witness, not his achievements, not his lineage, not his years of practice. The earth, the ground beneath him, the simple, solid, undeniable reality of this moment. And the earth responded. According to the ancient texts, the earth goddess herself rose up to testify on Siddhartha's behalf, and the ground trembled, and Mara's illusions shattered like glass struck by a stone, and the demon lord fled into the darkness with his armies and his daughters and his lies. And as the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, Siddhartha Gautama opened his eyes and saw reality exactly as it is. Clear, luminous, free. He had become the Buddha. Now, why does this story matter to you? Why should you care about a mythological battle that may or may not have literally happened 2.5 millennia ago? Because the story of Siddhartha and Mara is not really about a historical event. It is about the battle that takes place inside every human mind, every single day. Mara is not a character from ancient legend. Mara is the voice in your head right now, the one that might be saying, "This is just a story," or "This doesn't apply to me," or "My fears are different, my fears are real." Mara is every thought, every belief, every conditioned response that keeps you locked in a prison of anxiety and dread. And the message of the Buddha's awakening is stunningly direct. You can do what Siddhartha did, not in some future lifetime, not after years of monastic practice. Right now, right here, in this very moment, you can turn toward your fear, look at it clearly, and watch it dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Because that is what fear does when you stop running from it and start seeing it for what it truly is. But to understand how to do this, we need to go deeper. We need to understand what the Buddhist tradition actually teaches about the nature of fear itself. Here is something that might surprise you. In the Abhidharma, the core collection of texts on Buddhist psychology, a tradition that has been cataloging and analyzing mental states with extraordinary precision for over 2,000 years, fear is not listed as one of the primary mental afflictions. Think about that for a moment. In a system that names dozens of unhealthy mental states, including greed, hatred, delusion, pride, jealousy, and restlessness, fear does not appear as a standalone category. This is not an oversight. It is a profound insight. The reason fear is not listed as a primary affliction is that the Buddhist psychologists understood something that modern cognitive science is only now beginning to confirm. Fear is not a thing. It is not a fixed, independent entity that lives inside you like an organ or a bone. Fear is a process. It is a confluence of other mental factors, a temporary gathering of conditions that produces a particular experience. And when those conditions change, the experience changes too. According to Buddhist psychology, what we call fear is actually a compound experience made up of several elements. There is aversion, the mind's instinctive recoil from something it perceives as threatening. There is delusion, a fundamental misperception of the nature of the threat and of the self that is being threatened. There is craving, specifically the desperate craving for safety, for certainty, for the preservation of something the mind has decided it cannot afford to lose. And woven through all of this is a sense of a solid, separate self, an I that is in danger, an I that must be protected at all costs. Strip away any one of these components, and fear begins to lose its grip. Strip away all of them, and fear ceases to exist entirely. This is not philosophy. This is mechanics. This is like understanding that what you thought was a single, indivisible substance is actually a compound made up of elements that can be separated, examined, and transformed. The Buddhist teacher Judy Leaf, reflecting on these teachings, put it this way: fear arises from a fundamental confusion about the nature of reality, combined with the ego's desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of a permanent, separate self. When we look deeply at fear, we find that the object of fear and the subject who is afraid are not separate. They arise together, they depend on each other, and they can dissolve together. This is a revolutionary way of understanding the human experience of being afraid. In the Western psychological tradition, fear is typically treated as a response to an objective threat. Something dangerous exists out there in the world, and your brain detects it and generates a fear response to keep you safe. The solution, in this framework, is either to eliminate the threat or to learn to manage your response to it. The Buddhist framework does not deny that this kind of practical, survival-oriented fear exists. The Buddha himself acknowledged that there are situations in which fear serves a useful function. If a tiger is charging at you, the surge of adrenaline that makes you run is a gift, not a problem. If your child is about to touch a hot stove, the jolt of alarm that makes you grab their hand is appropriate and necessary. But the Buddhist teaching goes much further. It says that the vast majority of the fear that human beings experience on a daily basis is not this kind of practical, situation-specific alarm. It is something else entirely. It is a pervasive, low-level hum of anxiety that colors every experience, that lurks behind even our happiest moments, that whispers ceaselessly about loss and change and death and inadequacy. And this deeper fear, the fear that keeps you awake at 3 a.m, the fear that prevents you from living fully and loving boldly and dying peacefully, this fear is, in the Buddhist analysis, entirely unnecessary. It is a product of misunderstanding. It is the result of seeing the world through a distorted lens. And it can be corrected. To understand how, we need to look at the very foundation of Buddhist teaching, the Four Noble Truths, and see how they illuminate the architecture of fear. When the Buddha delivered his first sermon in the deer park at Sarnath, shortly after his enlightenment, he laid out the framework that would become the backbone of all Buddhist teaching. The Four Noble Truths are deceptively simple in their formulation, but they contain an ocean of practical wisdom, and they speak directly to the experience of fear. The first noble truth is the truth of dukkha, a word that is commonly translated as suffering, but that actually encompasses a much broader range of experience. Dukkha includes obvious forms of suffering like physical pain, grief, and loss. But it also includes subtler forms of dissatisfaction, the vague sense that something is not quite right, the background anxiety that accompanies even our most pleasant experiences, the nagging feeling that no matter what we achieve or acquire, it is never quite enough. Fear lives in the heart of dukkha. In fact, you might say that fear is dukkha's shadow. Every form of suffering that the Buddha identified is accompanied by a corresponding fear. We suffer because we age, and we fear aging. We suffer because we get sick, and we fear illness. We suffer because we die, and we fear death. We suffer when we are separated from what we love, and we fear loss. We suffer when we are confronted with what we find unpleasant, and we fear discomfort. We suffer when we do not get what we want, and we fear disappointment and failure. The first noble truth is not a pessimistic declaration that life is nothing but misery. It is a realistic assessment of the human condition, offered with the same calm precision that a doctor might use when delivering a diagnosis. The doctor does not tell you about your illness to make you feel bad. The doctor tells you so that you can begin the process of healing. And the Buddha's first truth is the beginning of a healing process that has been transforming human lives for more than 25 centuries. The second noble truth identifies the cause of this suffering, and it is here that the Buddhist understanding of fear becomes truly illuminating. The cause of dukkha, says the Buddha, is tanha, a Pali word that is usually translated as craving or thirst. Tanha is not just the wanting of material things, though it includes that. It is a deep, pervasive, almost instinctual grasping at experience, a desperate attempt to hold on to what is pleasant and push away what is unpleasant. Now watch carefully, because this is where the mechanism of fear reveals itself. Fear is what happens when tanha encounters the reality of impermanence. You love someone, and you are afraid of losing them. You have built a comfortable life, and you are afraid it will fall apart. You have constructed an identity, a story about who you are, and you are afraid that story will be exposed as fiction. In every case, the fear arises not from the external situation, but from the collision between your craving for things to stay the same and the fundamental truth that nothing ever does. The Buddha taught that this desire for pleasure and this fear of pain drives our cravings and attachments, and these manifest in many forms. A craving for material possessions, for fame, for power, or even for a fixed sense of self. Our cravings and attachments lead us to cling to constantly changing things, our physical body, our emotions, our thoughts. This clinging creates a sense of separation, and it is in that gap between what we want and what is that suffering, and its constant companion fear, make their home. The third noble truth offers the extraordinary promise that this suffering, this fear, can cease. Not temporarily, not through distraction or denial. Completely. The Buddha called this cessation nirodha, and he described it as the complete fading away and cessation of craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. When craving ends, suffering ends. And when the particular form of craving that produces fear is released, fear dissolves like salt in warm water, not because something was added, but because something was let go. The fourth noble truth provides the practical path for making this happen, the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is not a set of commandments to be followed blindly. It is a sophisticated training program for the mind, designed to systematically dismantle the patterns of thinking and behaving that generate suffering and replace them with patterns that generate freedom, clarity, and peace. Every element of the Eightfold Path contributes to the dissolution of fear. Right view helps you see reality as it is, rather than through the distorted lens of craving and aversion. Right mindfulness trains you to observe your mental states, including fear, without being swept away by them. Right concentration gives you a stable center from which to face whatever arises, a place of inner calm that remains steady even when the storms of life are at their fiercest. But of all the Buddhist teachings that speak to fear, there is one that cuts deepest, that goes straight to the root of our deepest anxieties and pulls it out entirely. That teaching is the doctrine of impermanence. In the Pali language of the early Buddhist texts, the word for impermanence is anicca. It is one of the three marks of existence, the fundamental characteristics that define all conditioned phenomena. Everything that comes into being passes away. Every form that arises eventually dissolves. Every experience, no matter how intense, no matter how beautiful, no matter how terrible, is temporary. This is not a theory. It is not a philosophical position that you can debate in a classroom. It is the most basic, observable fact about the universe we inhabit. The stars are born and die over billions of years. Mountains rise and erode over millions. Civilizations flourish and crumble over centuries. Human bodies grow and age and return to the earth over decades. Thoughts flicker through your mind and vanish in fractions of a second. Everything is in motion. Nothing holds still. And this, the Buddhist tradition teaches, is the root of all fear. We are afraid because we are in love with permanence. We are afraid because somewhere deep in the architecture of our minds, we have built a fantasy world in which the things we love last forever, in which our bodies never fail, in which our loved ones never leave, in which the ground beneath our feet is solid and stable and will never give way. And every day, reality contradicts this fantasy. Every day, something changes, something ends, something we were counting on shifts beneath us. And every time this happens, the gap between our fantasy of permanence and the reality of impermanence generates a fresh wave of fear. The monk whose flowers fade before and the flames that died down in offering at a Buddhist shrine are not merely decorative. They are teaching aids. They are gentle, daily reminders that everything the eye can see, everything the hand can touch, everything the mind can conceive, is moving, changing, transforming, dissolving. The flowers that were bright this morning will be wilted by evening. The flame that burns now will be ashes by dawn. And you, the one watching, the one who thinks, I am here, I am real, I am permanent. You too are in motion, changing with every breath, every heartbeat, every passing moment. Now, you might expect this teaching to make fear worse. If everything is impermanent, if nothing lasts, if even the self is a temporary construction that will one day come apart, shouldn't that be the most terrifying truth of all? And yet the opposite is the case. The Buddhist tradition is unanimous on this point. The deep understanding of impermanence does not increase fear. It ends it. Here's why. Fear depends on the illusion of permanence for its survival. Think about it. Every fear you have ever experienced is, at its core, a fear of change. You are afraid of losing your health because you believe your health is something permanent that can be taken away. You are afraid of losing a relationship because you believe the relationship is a fixed thing that should endure. You are afraid of death because you believe your current form of existence is the only form of existence, and that losing it means losing everything. But what if you understood, not just intellectually but in your bones, in your cells, in the very marrow of your being, that nothing was ever permanent to begin with? What if you could see, with the same clarity with which you see your own hand in front of your face, that everything you are afraid of losing was always in the process of changing, always on its way somewhere else, always already in motion? The fear of loss only makes sense if you believe you have something to lose. And the teaching of impermanence reveals that you never had a permanent possession of anything in the first place. Not your body, not your name, not your relationships, not your thoughts, not your identity. All of these are processes, not things. They are rivers, not rocks. And you cannot lose a river, because a river is, by its very nature, always moving. The Dhammapada, one of the most beloved collections of the Buddha's sayings, captures this with crystalline simplicity. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This does not mean that the enlightened person stops caring about life. The Buddha himself, after his awakening, spent 45 years walking the dusty roads of India, teaching, caring for his students, tending to the sick, resolving disputes. He was fully engaged with the world, but he was engaged without clinging. He loved without grasping. He participated in the dance of existence without demanding that the music never stop. And this, the Buddhist tradition tells us, is the source of true fearlessness. Not the absence of feeling, not the numbness of someone who has withdrawn from life, but the vivid, luminous, fully present engagement with reality as it actually is, moment by moment, without the overlay of fantasy and fear. Zen Buddhism, the branch of the tradition that emphasizes direct experience over theoretical understanding, is particularly rich in stories that illustrate this kind of fearlessness. These are not fairy tales. They are teaching stories, carefully crafted and preserved over centuries, designed to transmit insights that cannot be captured in philosophical arguments or doctrinal explanations. They bypass the rational mind and speak directly to something deeper, something that already knows the truth but has been too afraid to acknowledge it. Consider the story of the Zen abbot and the samurai warlord, one of the most famous tales in the entire Zen tradition. During the civil wars of feudal Japan, an invading army swept through the countryside, leaving destruction and terror in its wake. As the army approached a small town, the residents fled in panic. The monks in the local monastery, hearing that the ruthless general was approaching, abandoned their robes and their meditation cushions and ran for the hills. Every single one of them fled. Every single one, that is, except the abbot. When the general and his soldiers burst through the monastery gates, expecting to find the place deserted, they instead found the old abbot sitting at the front of the shrine room in perfect meditation posture. His spine was straight. His breath was even. His eyes were open and clear. The general, accustomed to inspiring terror wherever he went, was enraged by this display of calm defiance. He strode up to the abbot, drew his sword, and held the gleaming blade inches from the old man's throat. "Do you not know who I am?" the general snarled. "I am the sort of man who could run you through with this sword without batting an eye." The abbot looked up at the general. His expression was neither hostile nor submissive. It was simply present. Without fear, without aggression, without the slightest tremor in his voice, he replied, "And I, sir, am the sort of man who could be run through by a sword without batting an eye." The general stood motionless. Something in the abbot's words, or perhaps something in the absolute stillness from which they emerged, cut through the general's armor of violence and pride and reached something human and tender underneath. He lowered his sword. He bowed, and he left the monastery without harming anyone. This story has been told for centuries, not because it is a tale of superhuman courage or magical protection, but because it illustrates a very specific insight. The abbot's fearlessness did not come from being indifferent to death. It came from having already made peace with the fact that he, like all beings, was impermanent. He had nothing to protect because he understood there was no permanent self to protect. He was free, not because his circumstances were safe, but because his mind was clear. The Zen tradition offers us another illuminating story, this one about the great master Hakuin, who lived in Japan in the 1700s. A samurai named Nobushige came to Hakuin one day and asked him a direct question. "Is there really a paradise and a hell?" Hakuin looked at the warrior and responded not with a philosophical lecture, but with a provocation. "Who are you?" he demanded. When Nobushige replied that he was a samurai, Hakuin sneered. "You a soldier? What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Your face looks like that of a beggar." Nobushige's blood began to boil. His hand moved toward his sword. Hakuin pressed harder. "So you have a sword. Your weapon is probably too dull to cut off my head." In a flash of fury, Nobushige drew his blade and prepared to strike. At that precise moment, Hakuin looked into the samurai's blazing eyes and said, calmly, "Here open the gates of hell." The words hit Nobushige like cold water. In an instant, he saw what had happened. He saw how quickly his mind had moved from curiosity to anger to murderous rage, how easily he had been swept from a state of rational inquiry into a state of violent reactivity. He saw, in real time, how the hell of suffering was created not by external circumstances, but by the uncontrolled movements of his own mind. He sheathed his sword and bowed deeply. "Here," said Hakuin, smiling, "open the gates of paradise." The teaching embedded in this story is profound and practical. Heaven and hell are not places you go after you die. They are states of mind you create in every moment. When you are consumed by fear, anger, or craving, you are in hell right now, in this very instant, regardless of how comfortable your physical surroundings might be. When you are present, aware, and at peace, you are in paradise, even if the external circumstances of your life are difficult. Fear, in this understanding, is one of the primary gates to hell. Not because fear is evil or sinful, but because fear, when it is not recognized and understood, takes over the mind and creates suffering that is entirely unnecessary. There is another Zen story that speaks directly to the way we carry fear long after the situation that triggered it has passed. Two monks were traveling together on a muddy road after a heavy rain. They came to a river crossing where a young woman stood, unable to get across because of the deep mud and rushing water. Without a word, the elder monk picked her up, carried her across the river, set her down gently on the other side, and continued walking. The younger monk was scandalized. Their monastic vows prohibited physical contact with women. He stewed in silence for hours, growing more and more agitated, more and more upset, more and more afraid that some terrible karmic consequence would befall them for this transgression. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, the young monk burst out. "How could you do that? You know we are not permitted to touch a woman. How could you carry her on your back?" The elder monk stopped, turned, and looked at his companion with gentle puzzlement. "I set her down at the river," he said. "Why are you still carrying her?" This story is about fear as much as it is about attachment. The younger monk was carrying a burden of anxiety and dread that had no connection to present reality. The moment had passed. The woman had been helped. No harm had been done. But in his mind, the young monk was still at the riverbank, still in the grip of fear about rules and consequences and judgment. How much of your life is spent carrying burdens that you set down long ago? How many of your fears are not about what is happening now, but about what happened yesterday, last year in childhood? How much of your anxiety is a ghost, a phantom, a memory that masquerades as a present tense emergency? The Zen tradition would say, most of it, almost all of it. The fear you feel right now, in this moment, as you lie in bed or sit in your chair or walk down the street, is almost never about a genuine, immediate threat. It is almost always about a story your mind is telling, a projection into an imagined future or a replaying of a remembered past, and neither of these exists anywhere except inside the theater of your own skull. This brings us to one of the most profound and challenging teachings in all of Buddhism, the teaching of emptiness, or in Sanskrit, sunyata. And before you let that word scare you, because the word emptiness can sound bleak and nihilistic to Western ears, let me assure you that this is actually the most liberating concept you will ever encounter. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. It does not mean the world is a void or that your life is meaningless. Emptiness, in the Buddhist understanding, means that all things are empty of a fixed, independent, permanent self-nature. Nothing exists in isolation. Nothing exists on its own. Everything arises in dependence on other things. Everything is interconnected. Everything is in a constant state of becoming and dissolving. The Heart Sutra, one of the most chanted texts in all of Mahayana Buddhism, puts it this way: form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. This is not a riddle designed to confuse you. It is a precise description of reality. The things you see, the chair you are sitting in, the body you inhabit, the thoughts passing through your mind, all of these are real in the sense that they are experienced, but they are empty in the sense that they have no permanent, unchanging core. Now, why does this matter for our exploration of fear? Because fear depends on the belief in a permanent self. If there is no permanent self, there is nothing that can be permanently threatened. If there is nothing that can be permanently threatened, the foundation of fear collapses. Think about it. What are you afraid of? Really, at the deepest level? You are afraid that something terrible will happen to you. But who is this you that terrible things can happen to? Is it your body? Your body is already changing, already aging, already in the process of transformation. Is it your mind? Your thoughts are arising and passing away faster than you can count them. Is it your identity, the story you tell about who you are? That story has already changed dozens of times over the course of your life. You are not the same person you were at 5 or 15 or 25. Even the you of yesterday is not the same you that is here right now. The teaching of emptiness does not rob you of your experience. It frees you from the tyranny of believing that your experience has to be a certain way for you to be okay. It opens the door to a way of living that is engaged, compassionate, and fully present, but not burdened by the constant, exhausting, ultimately futile effort of trying to hold on to a version of reality that was never going to hold still. The great Zen masters used koans, those famously paradoxical teaching riddles, to push their students beyond conceptual understanding and into a direct experience of this emptiness. The most famous koan of all, Mu, given by the master Joshu when asked whether a dog has Buddha nature, is essentially a doorway into the experience of emptiness. When the student has wrestled with this question long enough, when the rational mind has exhausted itself trying to find an answer, something breaks open. Mumin, the great compiler of Zen koans, described it this way: at the very cliff edge of birth and death, you find the great freedom. The cliff edge of birth and death is the place where all our fears converge. It is the recognition that everything we cling to is falling away, that there is no solid ground beneath our feet, that the self we have spent our entire lives constructing and defending is a castle built on sand. And paradoxically, magnificently, it is at this edge, this terrifying edge, that freedom is found. Because when you stop clinging, there is nothing left to fear. When you stop building castles on sand, the shifting sand is no longer a threat. When you stop pretending that you are a solid, permanent, independent entity, the impermanence of the universe is no longer an enemy to be fought, but a dance to be joined. Now, you might be thinking that all of this sounds beautiful in theory, but what does modern science have to say about it? Is there any empirical evidence that meditation and mindfulness practice can actually change the way the brain processes fear? The answer is a resounding yes, and the evidence is growing more robust every year. At the center of the brain's fear circuitry sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. This tiny cluster of neurons, nestled deep within the temporal lobe on each side of the brain, is your body's alarm system. It is constantly scanning the environment for potential threats, And when it detects something that it interprets as dangerous, it triggers the fight or flight response. The cascade of stress hormones, the racing heart, the shallow breathing, the tunnel vision, the overwhelming urge to either attack or run. The amygdala is magnificently useful when you are faced with a genuine physical threat. If a car swerves into your lane, if you hear a sound that could be an intruder in your home, if you encounter any situation that requires immediate, instinctive action, the amygdala is your best friend. It evolved to keep your ancestors alive on the African savanna, where the difference between life and death was often measured in milliseconds. The problem is that the amygdala does not distinguish between a real threat and an imagined one. As far as your amygdala is concerned, the anxiety you feel about a difficult conversation tomorrow is just as real and just as urgent as the fear you would feel if a tiger were charging at you right now. The stress hormones are the same. The physical symptoms are the same. The sense of emergency is the same. The only difference is that in one case the threat is real and in the other it exists only in your imagination. This is why so many people live in a chronic state of low-grade fear. Their amygdalae are firing constantly, reacting not to actual dangers, but to the endless stream of imagined dangers that their minds generate. The result is a body that is perpetually flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, a nervous system that is permanently stuck in fight or flight mode, and a subjective experience of life that is dominated by anxiety, tension, and dread. Here is where the science gets exciting. Research conducted at institutions including Harvard Medical School, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and numerous other centers has demonstrated that mindfulness meditation practice produces measurable, structural changes in the brain, particularly in the amygdala and its connections to the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thought, emotional regulation, and decision-making. A groundbreaking study published in the journal Neuroimage found that participants who completed an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program showed reduced amygdala activation in response to emotional stimuli. The amygdala in these participants was literally less reactive, less likely to sound the alarm in response to perceived threats. And the changes were not just temporary. Brain scans showed that the neural architecture of these participants had been physically altered by the practice of meditation. Additional research has shown that meditation not only reduces amygdala reactivity, but also strengthens the functional connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. This means that in experienced meditators, the rational, decision-making part of the brain has a stronger brake on the fear-generating part. The alarm still sounds when necessary, but the higher brain can more quickly and effectively assess whether the alarm is warranted and, if it is not, quiet it down before it cascades into a full-blown anxiety response. A randomized controlled trial conducted at Carnegie Mellon University demonstrated that even a 3-day intensive mindfulness meditation training was enough to reduce resting state functional connectivity between the amygdala and the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region involved in stress processing. In plain language, just 3 days of focused meditation practice was enough to begin rewiring the brain's stress circuits. The implications of this research are profound. For thousands of years, Buddhist practitioners have been reporting that meditation reduces fear and anxiety. Now science is showing us exactly how it works at the level of individual neurons and neural circuits. The ancient practice and the modern data are telling the same story from different angles. Meditation does not eliminate the amygdala. It does not shut down the fear response entirely. And this is important because you need your amygdala. You need to be able to respond quickly to genuine threats. What meditation does is refine the system. It helps the brain become more accurate in its threat assessment, less likely to generate false alarms, and more capable of returning to a state of calm after a genuine threat has passed. It is like upgrading the software in your personal security system so that it stops waking you up every time a leaf blows across the motion sensor. The production of neurotransmitters associated with relaxation and well-being, such as serotonin and gamma-aminobutyric acid, also increases with regular meditation practice. These molecular changes create what researchers describe as a more peaceful internal environment, reducing stress hormones and fostering a sense of inner calm that becomes, over time, the default state rather than the exception. Modern neuroscience is, in essence, validating what the Buddhist tradition has been teaching for 2,500 years. The mind is not fixed. It is plastic, malleable, capable of profound transformation. The patterns of fear and anxiety that you have been running for years, for decades, possibly for your entire life, are not permanent features of your psyche. They are habits, and habits can be changed. Now let us turn from the laboratory to the meditation hall and spend some time with two of the most influential Buddhist teachers of the modern era, both of whom dedicated much of their life's work to helping people understand and transform their relationship with fear. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, poet, and peace activist who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King Jr., wrote extensively about fear and spent decades developing practical methods for working with it. His approach was characterized by an extraordinary tenderness, a gentle insistence that fear is not an enemy to be conquered, but a suffering child within us that needs to be held with compassion and care. Most of us experience a life full of wonderful moments and difficult moments, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote. But for many of us, even when we are most joyful, there is fear behind our joy. We fear that this moment will end, that we will not get what we need, that we will lose what we love, or that we will not be safe. Often, our biggest fear is the knowledge that one day our bodies will cease functioning. So even when we are surrounded by all the conditions for happiness, our joy is not complete. This passage captures something that most people know intuitively but rarely articulate. Even our happiest moments are tinged with anxiety. Even when everything is going well, there is a quiet voice saying, "This will not last." This is the fear that runs beneath the surface of even the most fortunate life, the background hum of impermanence that colors every experience with a faint shade of dread. Thich Nhat Hanh's prescription for this fear is deceptively simple and profoundly effective. He taught that the antidote to fear is mindfulness, the practice of bringing your full attention to the present moment. Fear keeps us focused on the past or worried about the future, he wrote. If we can acknowledge our fear, we can realize that right now we are okay. Right now, today, we are still alive, and our bodies are working marvelously. Our eyes can still see the beautiful sky. Our ears can still hear the voices of our loved ones. This is not the naive optimism of someone who has never suffered. Thich Nhat Hanh lived through the Vietnam War. He watched his country torn apart by violence. He was exiled from his homeland for decades because of his work for peace. He knew suffering intimately, personally, in his bones. And it was precisely because of this deep familiarity with suffering that his teachings on fear carry such weight. He developed a practice he called embracing your fear, which involves sitting in meditation and gently inviting the feeling of fear to come into your awareness, rather than pushing it away or trying to distract yourself from it. Invite your fear into consciousness, he wrote, and smile through it. Every time you smile through your fear, it will lose some of its strength. If you try to run away from your pain, there is no way out. Only by looking deeply into the nature of your fear can you find the way out. This approach is the opposite of the instinct most of us follow when fear arises. Our typical response to fear is to fight it, flee from it, or freeze in its presence. Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching asks us to do something much braver, to turn toward the fear, to welcome it, to treat it with the same tenderness we would show a frightened child. You can sit down with that fearful child inside, he wrote, and be gentle with him or her. You might say something like this: "Dear little child, I am your adult self. I would like to tell you that we are no longer a baby, helpless and vulnerable. We have strong hands and strong feet. We can very well defend ourselves. So there is no reason why we have to continue to be fearful anymore." This practice of inner dialogue with fear is not metaphorical. It is a real, practical technique that can be used in the middle of a panic attack, before a difficult meeting, during a sleepless night, or in any moment when fear threatens to overwhelm. It works because it interrupts the automatic cycle of fear, avoidance, and more fear that keeps so many people trapped. By turning toward the fear, by acknowledging it and meeting it with kindness, you break the pattern. You discover that fear, when it is met rather than fled from, begins to lose its power. Thich Nhat Hanh also taught extensively about what he called original fear, the fear that is born in the moment of birth itself. When a baby is expelled from the warmth and safety of the womb into the cold, bright, overwhelming world, that baby experiences a terror so primal that it leaves an imprint on the psyche that lasts a lifetime. Every subsequent fear, he suggested, is in some way an echo of that original separation, that first experience of vulnerability and helplessness. Fearlessness is not only possible, it is the ultimate joy, he wrote. When you touch non-fear, you are free. But he was always careful to add that no one can give you fearlessness, not even the Buddha himself. You have to practice it and realize it yourself, he insisted. If you make a habit of mindfulness practice, when difficulties arise, you will already know what to do. He also addressed one of the deepest fears known to the human species, the fear of death, with characteristic directness. Our greatest fear is that when we die, we will become nothing, he wrote. Many of us believe our entire existence is limited to a particular period, our lifespan. We believe it begins when we are born, when, out of being nothing, we become something, and it ends when we die and become nothing again. His teaching on this subject draws on the Buddhist understanding of no birth and no death. The Buddha taught that there is no birth and no death, he said. When you look at a cloud, you see that a cloud cannot die. A cloud can become rain or snow or ice, but a cloud cannot become nothing. And so it is with you. This teaching of continuation, of the impossibility of true annihilation, is one of the most powerful antidotes to the fear of death in the entire Buddhist tradition. If Thich Nhat Hanh approached fear with the tenderness of a loving parent, Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun and best-selling author, approached it with the directness of a friend who will not let you lie to yourself. Chodron, who was born Deirdre Blomfield Brown in New York City in 1936, and whose journey from a conventional American life to the leadership of a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Nova Scotia is a story of remarkable transformation, has spent decades teaching people how to work with fear, uncertainty, and the fundamental groundlessness of human existence. Pema Chodron's approach to fear is built on a concept she calls groundlessness, the recognition that there is no solid foundation beneath our feet, no unchanging reality we can cling to, no guarantee that things will turn out the way we want them to. Rather than treating this groundlessness as a problem to be solved, Chodron teaches that it is actually the doorway to freedom. If we are willing to give up hope that insecurity and pain can be exterminated, she writes, then we can have the courage to relax with the groundlessness of our situation. This is a radical statement. It says that the search for security, the desperate attempt to find some solid ground on which to stand, is itself the source of our suffering. The ground was never solid. It was never going to be solid. And the sooner we stop pretending otherwise, the sooner we can begin to live with genuine ease and freedom. Kodrin's personal entry point into these teachings was her own experience of devastating groundlessness. When her second husband announced that he was having an affair and wanted a divorce, she was thrown into what she describes as a totally groundless state. She could not feel any ground under her feet. She was scared and angry and could not get anything to come back together. It was this experience of having her life fall apart that led her to Buddhist practice and, eventually, to ordination as a nun. If you touch the fear instead of running from it, she teaches, you find tenderness, vulnerability, and sometimes a sense of sadness. This tender-heartedness happens naturally when you start to be brave enough to stay present, because instead of armoring yourself, instead of turning to anger, self-denigration, and iron-heartedness, you keep your eyes open and you begin to see the blueness of an iris, the wetness of water, the movement of the wind. This is one of the most beautiful and counterintuitive insights in all of Buddhist teaching, that on the other side of fear, there is not numbness or indifference, but a heightened appreciation for the beauty and preciousness of life. The willingness to face fear opens the heart rather than closing it. It makes you more sensitive, more compassionate, more alive, not less. Kodrin also emphasizes the concept of warrior or spiritual warriorship, drawn from the Shambhala Buddhist tradition of her teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. A spiritual warrior is not someone who fights external enemies. A spiritual warrior is someone who has the courage to face their own mind, to sit with their own pain and fear, to look unflinchingly at the parts of themselves that they would rather hide. The definition of an enlightened being is one who is completely fearless, Kodrin teaches. But she is quick to add that fearlessness does not mean the absence of fear. It means a willingness to be fully present with whatever arises, including fear itself. If you do not get to know the nature of fear, she says, then you will never know fearlessness. One of the most practical tools in the Buddhist toolkit for working with fear is one we have not yet fully explored: the practice of metta, or loving kindness. The origin story of metta practice is itself a story about fear. According to the Pali commentaries, the Buddha once sent a group of monks into a forest to meditate. The forest was home to tree spirits, devas in the Buddhist understanding, who resented the intrusion of the monks into their territory. These spirits set about terrifying the monks, creating fearful sounds, awful smells, and disturbing visions. The monks were so frightened that they fled the forest and returned to the Buddha, begging him to send them somewhere else. The Buddha's response was unexpected. He did not send them to a different forest. He did not tell them to be tough or to ignore their fear. Instead, he taught them the Metta Sutta, the discourse on loving kindness, and told them it would serve as both a meditation practice and a form of protection. He sent them back to the same forest, armed not with weapons or magical charms, but with the practice of radiating unconditional goodwill toward all beings, including the very spirits that had frightened them. The monks returned, sat down among the trees, and began to practice metta. They silently repeated phrases of well-wishing. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be free from fear and anxiety. May all beings be at ease. And something remarkable happened. The spirits, touched by the warm energy of loving kindness that now permeated the forest, not only stopped harassing the monks, but began to care for them, providing everything they needed for their practice. This story, whether we take it literally or metaphorically, teaches something vital about the relationship between love and fear. Loving kindness and fear cannot coexist. They are like light and darkness. Where one is present, the other is absent. When you are generating genuine goodwill toward another being, in that moment, there is no room for fear. The heart is too full of warmth to be paralyzed by dread. Modern research supports this ancient insight. Studies have shown that loving-kindness meditation reduces symptoms of anxiety and depression, improves emotional regulation, and actually lowers cortisol levels, the hormone most closely associated with the stress response. A 6-week study published by the National Library of Medicine found that compassion meditation styles, including loving-kindness, were linked to lower cortisol levels and improved heart rate variability, both key indicators of emotional self-regulation. The practice itself is simple, though like many simple things, it requires patience and persistence. You begin by sitting quietly and calling to mind someone you care about deeply. You silently offer them wishes of well-being. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you be free from fear. Then you gradually expand the circle of your concern, offering the same wishes to a friend, then to someone you feel neutral toward, then to someone you find difficult, and finally to all beings everywhere. What happens over the course of this practice is subtle but powerful. As you repeatedly generate feelings of warmth and goodwill, you begin to soften the hard edges of your own fear. The boundaries between self and other become less rigid. The sense of isolation and vulnerability that feeds fear begins to dissolve. You begin to feel, not just think, but feel in your body and your heart that you are not alone, that you are part of a vast web of interconnection, and that the well-being of every other being is intimately linked to your own. The Buddha himself pointed to this connection between love and fearlessness in the Abhyasutta, the fearless discourse. He described 4 types of people who are free from fear, and the first is one who has done what is good, has done what is skillful, has given protection to those in fear. In other words, the person who generates compassion and acts on it is the person who becomes free from fear, not because they are rewarded for their good behavior, but because the very act of loving dissolves the conditions in which fear can take root. But before we reach that conclusion, there are more depths to explore, more stories to hear, more practices to understand. Because the journey from fear to freedom is not a straight line. It is a winding path through terrain that changes with every step. And the more completely we map that terrain, the more confident we can be when we walk it alone. Let us return, for a moment, to the forest. Not the forest of Bodh Gaya where the Buddha sat, but another forest, one that appears again and again in the Buddhist tradition as a place of both danger and transformation. In the time of the Buddha, the forest was where serious practitioners went to test themselves. It was not a metaphor. It was a real, physical place, dense with undergrowth, alive with the sounds of animals, prowled by tigers and leopards and wild elephants. To meditate in the forest was to sit with genuine danger, to make yourself vulnerable in the most literal sense, to strip away every comfort and protection and face the raw, unmediated reality of existence. The Bhayabharava Sutta, a discourse from the Pali Canon, records the Buddha's own account of meditating in the wilderness before his enlightenment. He describes, with remarkable candor, the fears that arose in him during those nights in the forest. He tells of the terror that gripped him when an animal would crash through the undergrowth, when a peacock would snap a branch in the darkness, when the wind would rustle through the fallen leaves. He admits that fear arose in him not because of any real threat, but because of the darkness and the isolation and the mind's tendency to populate the unknown with imagined dangers. But what did the Buddha do with this fear? He did not suppress it. He did not pretend it was not there. He did not flee the forest and return to the safety of a village. Instead, he made a practice of moving directly into whatever posture he was holding when the fear arose. If he was walking when fear appeared, he continued walking until the fear subsided. If he was standing, he continued standing. If he was sitting, he continued sitting. He refused to change his behavior in response to the fear because he understood that doing so would reinforce the fear's power. By holding his ground, by maintaining his practice regardless of what he was feeling, he gradually weakened fear's grip on his mind. This approach, meeting fear with stillness rather than reactivity, is the essence of what the Buddhist tradition calls right effort. It is not aggressive. It is not forceful. It is simply the steady, patient refusal to let fear dictate your actions. Over time, this refusal becomes a kind of strength, not the brute strength of willpower, but the quiet strength of someone who has learned that fear is a wave, and that if you stand firm, every wave eventually recedes. The experience of Christopher Titmuss, a well-known Western meditation teacher who spent time as a monk in a Vipassana monastery in southern Thailand, offers a modern parallel. One day, Titmuss saw two dogs in the temple courtyard barking and snapping at a large poisonous snake. The snake slithered away from the dogs and moved directly toward a monk who was sitting in deep meditation under a tree. Titmuss watched, frozen, as the venomous snake approached the meditator. The snake came within inches of the monk's leg, paused, and then turned and glided away without striking. The monk, absorbed in his practice, never moved. He may not have even known the snake was there. Was this a miracle? Was the monk protected by supernatural forces? The Buddhist explanation is far more interesting than that. The monk was radiating a quality of stillness and harmlessness that the snake, a creature exquisitely sensitive to the energy of its environment, could perceive. There was no threat in the monk's body, no aggression, no fear. And in the absence of these signals, the snake had no reason to strike. This is not to say that meditation makes you immune to snake bites. The point is subtler than that. It is that the energy you carry, the quality of your mental state, affects your relationship with the world around you in ways that are both profound and measurable. A person consumed by fear is broadcasting a signal of vulnerability and distress that actually increases their likelihood of encountering the very things they fear. A person who has cultivated inner calm is broadcasting a different signal entirely, one that tends to de-escalate conflict, reduce threat, and create the conditions for safety and connection. This principle extends far beyond encounters with wild animals. Think about the last time you walked into a room carrying a heavy burden of anxiety. What happened? People picked up on it. The energy in the room shifted. Interactions became tense. Misunderstandings multiplied. Now think about a time when you walked into a room feeling genuinely at ease, genuinely present, genuinely open. The difference is palpable. Your internal state shapes your external reality in ways that are both mysterious and practical. The Buddha understood this deeply, which is why he told the forest monks that the practice of loving kindness, metta, would serve as their protection. Not because metta creates a magical force field, but because when you are genuinely radiating goodwill toward all beings, you are in a state that is incompatible with fear, and that state changes the way you move through the world. Let us go deeper still into the teachings, because there is a dimension of the Buddhist understanding of fear that we have only touched on, and it may be the most important dimension of all. This is the teaching of dependent origination, or praditya samutpada in Sanskrit, one of the most profound and far-reaching insights in the entire Buddhist tradition. Dependent origination is the teaching that nothing exists independently. Everything that arises in dependence on conditions. Your fear does not appear out of nowhere. It does not spring into existence fully formed, like Athena from the head of Zeus. It arises because certain conditions are present: a thought, a memory, a sensation, a belief, a hormonal state, a sleep deficit, a news story, a comment from a coworker. Change any one of these conditions, and the fear changes. Remove enough of them, and the fear dissolves. This is enormously practical knowledge. When you understand that your fear is not a monolithic, unassailable fortress, but rather a temporary assembly of conditions, you can begin to work with those conditions one by one. You cannot control all of them, but you can influence many of them. You can change the way you breathe. You can change the way you think about a situation. You can change the amount of sleep you get. You can change the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you are capable of. You can change the quality of your attention, shifting it from the imagined catastrophes of the future to the actual reality of the present moment. Each of these changes alters the conditions that give rise to fear. And as the conditions change, fear changes too. Not through force, not through willpower, not through gritting your teeth and muscling through, but through the gentle, patient, persistent work of understanding causes and conditions and learning to work with them skillfully. The 12 links of dependent origination, which trace the chain of causation from ignorance through to suffering and rebirth, include a link that is particularly relevant to our exploration, Vedana, or feeling tone. Every experience you have, every sensation, every perception, is accompanied by a feeling tone that is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This feeling tone arises automatically, before conscious thought even begins, and it is the hinge on which the entire mechanism of suffering turns. When the feeling tone is unpleasant, as it is with fear, the mind's instinctive response is aversion, the desire to push the experience away. This aversion is itself a form of craving, the craving for the absence of something unpleasant. And this craving generates clinging, and clinging generates becoming, and becoming generates the whole cycle of suffering that the Buddha identified in his first sermon. But here is the crucial point. The chain can be broken at the link of Vedana. When an unpleasant feeling tone arises, you have a choice. You can react automatically, following the conditioned pattern of aversion and craving, or you can pause, notice the feeling tone, and simply observe it without reacting. In that moment of observation, the chain is broken. The fear may still be present, but the suffering that comes from resisting fear, from fighting it, from identifying with it, from building it into a narrative about who you are and what the world is, that suffering ceases. This is the practice that the Buddhist tradition calls vipassana, or insight meditation. It is the practice of sitting with whatever arises and observing it with clear, non-judgmental attention. Not trying to change it, not trying to make it go away, not trying to replace it with something more pleasant. Just seeing it, feeling it, knowing it, and letting it do what all conditioned phenomena do: arise, persist for a time, and pass away. When you apply vipassana to fear, something extraordinary happens. You discover that fear is not the solid, permanent, immovable thing you always believed it to be. It is a process, a flow, a series of moments that are constantly changing. The physical sensations shift. The thoughts morph. The intensity waxes and wanes. If you watch fear with enough patience and attention, you will see it dissolve right before your eyes, not because you did anything to make it go away, but because dissolution is its nature. It was always going to dissolve. You just never sat still long enough to watch it happen. Ajahn Chah, the great Thai forest master who trained an entire generation of Western Buddhist monks, had a characteristically earthy way of expressing this. He would pick up a glass and say, "Do you see this glass? I love this glass. It holds my water so well. When the sun shines through it, it casts beautiful patterns. But in my mind, the glass is already broken, because I know that someday, somehow, it will break. And because I know this, every moment I have with this glass is precious, and when it finally breaks, I can say, of course." This is the attitude toward all of existence that the Buddhist path cultivates. Not indifference, not resignation, a deep, tender appreciation for the beauty of things precisely because they are temporary. And when you hold your own life, your own body, your own relationships, with this quality of tender acceptance, fear loosens its grip, because you are no longer fighting the fundamental nature of reality. You are dancing with it. There is a famous Zen saying, "The barn has burned down. Now I can see the moon." This is what happens when you stop clinging to the structures of permanence and security that you have built around yourself. The loss of what you thought you needed reveals something you always had, but could never see because it was hidden behind the very walls you built to protect yourself. And what you discover when the walls come down and the barn burns to ash is that the moon has been shining the entire time, vast and luminous and free. Let us consider now the relationship between fear and compassion, because this is one of the most practically useful insights in the entire Buddhist tradition. Compassion, or karuna in the Pali and Sanskrit languages, is the second of the four Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, or immeasurable qualities that the Buddha identified as foundational to the spiritual life. The four are loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha. Together, they constitute a comprehensive training in the emotions that liberate, as opposed to the emotions that bind. Fear and compassion stand in a particular relationship to each other. Fear contracts the heart. It draws the boundaries of self tighter and tighter, until the world seems to consist of nothing but threats and the desperate need to protect this tiny, embattled territory called me. Compassion does the opposite. It expands the heart. It loosens the boundaries of self. It connects you with the suffering of others in a way that paradoxically reduces your own suffering, because it breaks the isolation that fear feeds on. When you are afraid, you feel alone. Fear tells you that you are the only one who is suffering, that no one else could understand, that you must face this threat by yourself. But compassion reveals the truth. Everyone is afraid. Every human being on this planet knows what it feels like to lie awake at 3 a.m. with a pounding heart and a racing mind. Every parent fears for their children. Every child fears abandonment. Every lover fears loss. Every aging body fears decline. Fear is the most universal of human experiences, and the recognition of this universality is itself a form of liberation. When you see that your fear is not unique, that it is shared by billions of other beings, something shifts. The fear does not disappear, but it loses its power to isolate you. You are no longer alone with it. You are part of a vast community of beings who are all navigating the same uncertain, impermanent, groundless existence, and this recognition softens the hard edges of your own anxiety. It makes you more tender, more open, more willing to reach out to others and to accept their support. The practice of Tonglen, a Tibetan Buddhist meditation technique that Pema Chodron has done much to popularize in the West, takes this principle to its logical conclusion. In Tonglen practice, you breathe in the suffering of others, visualizing it as dark, heavy smoke, and you breathe out relief and healing, visualizing it as cool, bright light. This practice reverses the normal instinct of fear, which is to push suffering away and pull comfort toward yourself. By deliberately taking in suffering and sending out relief, you are breaking the fundamental pattern that generates and sustains fear. This practice goes against every instinct. It feels counterintuitive, even dangerous. Surely, you might think, breathing in the suffering of the world will only make me more miserable, more anxious, more afraid. But the consistent testimony of practitioners, confirmed by the experience of thousands of people over many centuries, is that the opposite is true. Tonglen practice reduces fear. It increases resilience. It opens the heart. It reveals that you are far more spacious, far more capable, far more strong than you ever imagined. Pema Chodron explains why. By taking in the pain and sending out spaciousness and relief, the practice of Tonglen challenges our habitual reactions. By overcoming the fear of suffering, the tightness in the heart dissolves. It becomes softened and purified, and one can then become more open and compassionate. Fear tightens. Compassion softens. Fear isolates. Compassion connects. Fear says me against the world. Compassion says me and the world are not separate. And in that recognition of non-separation, the foundation of fear crumbles, because fear requires a separate self to protect. And when the boundaries of that separate self become permeable, there is nothing left to defend. This brings us back, full circle, to the teaching of emptiness that we explored earlier. Emptiness is not nihilism. It is the recognition that the self you have been defending, the self you have been afraid for, is not the solid, bounded, independent entity you always believed it to be. It is a process, a flow, a conversation between organism and environment that is constantly changing and that has no fixed center. And when you really see this, when you feel it in your bones and not just understand it in your head, fear becomes something like a weather pattern. It blows through, it rains, it thunders, and then it passes. And you, the sky through which it moves, remain vast and clear and untouched. The Zen nun Ishin, who lived in Japan centuries ago, demonstrated this understanding in a way that has become legendary. When she was past 60 and preparing to die, she asked some monks to pile wood in the courtyard. She seated herself at the center of the funeral pyre and asked them to light it. As the flames rose around her, one of the monks, apparently missing the point entirely, shouted out, "Is it hot in there?" Ishin's reply was characteristic of Zen directness. "Such a matter would concern only a stupid person like yourself." And then the flames consumed her, and she passed from this world with perfect composure. Now, it would be a misunderstanding to take this story as an endorsement of self-immolation or a dismissal of the body's pain. The point is not that Ishin did not feel the fire. The point is that she had so completely understood the nature of impermanence, the emptiness of the self, and the illusory quality of fear, that she could meet even the most extreme circumstance with clarity and equanimity. She was not indifferent to life. She had simply stopped fighting the inevitable. Very few of us will face anything as dramatic as Ishin's final teaching. But all of us face daily confrontations with impermanence that trigger fear. The wrinkle in the mirror, the ache in the joint, the news of a friend's illness, the moment when a child leaves home, the quiet realization that there are more years behind us than ahead. These everyday encounters with change are the real battlefield, the place where the Buddhist teachings on fear are either put into practice or left as beautiful ideas that made no difference. The invitation of the Buddhist path is to meet each of these moments with the same quality of presence that the abbot brought to the samurai's sword, that the forest monks brought to the terrifying spirits, that Siddhartha brought to Mara's armies. Not with the expectation that fear will not arise, because it will. Not with the demand that fear be eliminated, because elimination is just another form of aversion. But with the willingness to be fully present with whatever comes, to hold it with compassion, to see it clearly for what it is, and to let it pass through you like wine through an open window. The wrestler Onami, whose name meant great waves, provides us with one more story before we draw our exploration to a close. Onami was immensely powerful, one of the strongest wrestlers in all of Japan. In private matches, he could defeat anyone, even his own teacher. But in public, something happened. He froze. He became so nervous, so self-conscious, so afraid of losing face, that his own students could throw him. Desperate, Onami sought the help of a Zen master named Hakuju, who happened to be staying in a nearby temple. Hakuju listened to the wrestler's problem and gave him a single instruction. Your name means great waves. Stay in this temple tonight. Imagine that you are those enormous waves. You are no longer a wrestler who is afraid. You are the ocean itself, sweeping everything before you, swallowing everything in your path. Onami sat in meditation through the night. At first, the images came slowly, small waves lapping at the shore. But as the night deepened and his concentration intensified, the waves grew. They surged through the meditation hall. They swept over the statues and the flower arrangements. They rose until they engulfed the entire temple, and then they kept rising, until in his mind's eye, Onami saw nothing but an infinite ocean, powerful and calm, stretching in every direction without end. By morning, Onami's fear had vanished. Not because he had willed it away, not because he had told himself encouraging things, but because he had found something within himself that was larger than his fear. He had connected with the boundless nature of his own awareness, and from that place of vastness, the fears that had crippled him in public seemed small and insignificant, like drops of rain falling into the sea. From that day on, Onami was undefeatable, not because his technique had improved, but because his relationship with fear had changed. He was no longer a small, frightened person trying to be brave. He was the ocean. You are the ocean too. Beneath the surface turbulence of your daily fears and anxieties, beneath the churning waves of doubt and worry and dread, there is a depth to you that has never been disturbed, a stillness that has never been broken, a clarity that has never been clouded. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls your Buddha nature, the awakened awareness that is your birthright, your true identity, the ground of your being that no storm can shake. Fear would have you believe that you are the waves, that you are the turbulence on the surface, tossed about by forces beyond your control, at the mercy of every passing wind. But the waves are not the ocean. The waves are what the ocean does, and you are not your fear. Fear is what your mind does, sometimes under certain conditions. It is a temporary weather pattern in the vast sky of your awareness. It comes, it goes, and the sky remains. The Japanese warrior imprisoned and awaiting torture knew this when his Zen master's words came back to him. Tomorrow is not real. It is an illusion. The only reality is now. In this moment, in this breath, in this heartbeat, you are alive. You are aware. You are here. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Fear says it is not enough. Fear says there is something missing, something wrong, something that needs to be fixed before you can rest. But fear is wrong. Fear has always been wrong. And the 2,500-year history of Buddhist practice and realization is the accumulated testimony of millions of human beings who discovered this truth and lived it. Zen master Shikiri Kojin was reciting sutras one evening when a thief broke into his home brandishing a sharp sword. Without any trace of fear, Shikiri said, "Do not disturb me. Help yourself with the money. It is in that drawer." And he resumed his recitation. The thief was startled but helped himself to the money. As he was about to leave, Shikiri called out, "Do not take all of it. Leave some for me to pay my taxes tomorrow." Then, as the thief was at the door, Shikiri added, "You took my money and you did not even thank me. That is not polite." The thief thanked him and fled. Later, the thief told his companions that he had never been so frightened in his life. Consider the layers of this story. The thief came to create fear, but ended up experiencing it himself. The monk, who by all conventional logic should have been terrified, was completely at ease. The reversal happened not because the monk had a weapon or a plan or a bodyguard. It happened because he had something far more powerful, a mind that was not disturbed by the appearance of threat. And the thief, who had come to take something, left having received something far more valuable than money, a glimpse of what a human being looks like when they are free from fear. This is the gift that the Buddhist tradition offers to anyone willing to receive it. Not a belief system to adopt, not a set of rules to follow, not a distant paradise to hope for, but a practical, testable, experienceable transformation of the mind that makes it possible to live in this uncertain, impermanent, often frightening world with genuine equanimity, genuine joy, and genuine freedom. The 5 mental strengths that the Buddhist canon identifies as essential for this transformation are conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. Conviction is the trust that this path works, based not on blind faith, but on your own experience and the testimony of those who have walked it before you. Persistence is the willingness to keep practicing even when it is difficult, even when progress seems slow, even when the old habits of fear reassert themselves. Mindfulness is the capacity to stay present with what is happening, moment by moment, without being swept away by reactivity. Concentration is the deep focus that gives the mind stability and strength. And discernment is the wisdom that sees through the illusions that sustain fear and recognizes reality as it actually is. Each of these strengths can be cultivated. Each grows stronger with practice. And as they strengthen, fear weakens, not because you are fighting it, but because the conditions that sustain it are gradually being removed. As the renowned teacher Thanissaro Bhikkhu explains in his analysis of the Buddha's approach to fear, to genuinely free the mind from fear, we cannot simply deny that there is any reason for fear. We have to overcome the cause of fear, the mind's weaknesses in the face of very real dangers. The elegance of the Buddha's approach lies in his insight into the delusion that makes fear unskillful. He attacks delusion in 2 ways, getting us to think about its dangerous role in making fear unskillful, and getting us to develop inner strengths leading to the insights that free the mind from the delusions that make it weak. The strengths that the Buddha prescribes are not brute force. Each contains an element of wisdom, of discernment, of clear seeing. They do not suppress fear. They transform the conditions from which fear arises. And as those conditions transform, a new way of being emerges, one that does not depend on the world being safe or predictable or fair, but that finds its stability in the unshakable clarity of the mind itself. There is one more teaching to share, and it may be the most important of all. It is the teaching of the interconnection between suffering and awakening, between fear and freedom, between Mara and Buddha. Thich Nhat Hanh told a beautiful story about a time, long after the Buddha's enlightenment, when Mara came to visit. The Buddha's attendant, Ananda, saw Mara approaching and tried to turn him away. "Mara, why should the Buddha see you?" Ananda demanded. "Do you not remember that in the old days, under the Bodhi tree, you were defeated? You are the enemy of the Buddha." Mara just smiled and said, "What did you say, Ananda? You said the Buddha has an enemy?" Ananda was stunned. Of course, the Buddha could not have an enemy. The very concept of enemy requires a duality, a separation between self and other that the Buddha had transcended. And so Ananda went to the Buddha, expecting him to refuse to see Mara. But the Buddha's response surprised him. "Mara is here," the Buddha said. "Bring him in. I will make tea for Mara." And the Buddha sat with Mara and served him tea, treating him not as an adversary but as a guest, even an old friend. Because the Buddha understood something that Ananda did not. Mara is not separate from the path. Fear is not separate from freedom. Suffering is not separate from awakening. The Buddha needs Mara in order to grow beautifully as a flower, Thich Nhat Hanh explained. And Mara needs the Buddha because Mara has a certain role to play. Suffering is very important for your happiness. You cannot understand, you cannot love, until you know what suffering is. This teaching is the culmination of everything we have explored tonight. Fear is not your enemy. It is not something to be conquered, destroyed, or eliminated. It is a teacher, a guide, a faithful companion on the path to awakening. Every time fear arises, it is showing you where you are still clinging, still resisting, still believing in the illusion of a permanent, separate self. It is pointing, with painful but unerring accuracy, to the exact spot where freedom is waiting to be discovered. When you can sit with your fear the way the Buddha sat with Mara, with openness and curiosity, and even a kind of hospitality, everything changes. The fear does not become pleasant, but it stops being an obstacle and starts being a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is the vast, luminous, unshakable peace that the Buddhist tradition has been pointing to for 2,500 years. Consider the experience of someone practicing meditation for the first time. They sit down, perhaps in a quiet room, perhaps with a guided recording playing softly. They close their eyes. They try to focus on their breath. And within 30 seconds, the mind is off and running. A grocery list appears. A memory from childhood surfaces. A conversation that did not go well replays itself for the 100th time. And underneath all of it, humming like an electrical current, is anxiety. A nameless, formless unease that seems to have no specific cause and no specific cure. This is the moment when most people give up. They conclude that meditation is not for them, that their mind is too busy, that they are doing it wrong. But this is precisely the moment when the practice is working most powerfully. Because what has happened is that by sitting down and paying attention, you have for the first time become aware of what your mind has been doing all along, every waking moment of every day for your entire life. You have pulled back the curtain and seen the machinery of fear in operation. The insight meditator and teacher Joseph Goldstein has compared the mind in meditation to a snow globe that has been shaken. When you first sit down, the snow is swirling everywhere. You cannot see through it. But if you simply hold the globe still, without shaking it further, the snow gradually settles, and the water becomes clear. The thoughts and fears that seem so overwhelming when you first sit down are the snow. They were always there. You just could not see them because you were constantly shaking the globe through activity, distraction, and busyness. Meditation does not create the turbulence. It reveals it, and in revealing it, it gives you the opportunity to work with it. The first few weeks and months of meditation practice can actually feel like fear is getting worse, not better. This is not because meditation is generating new fears. It is because meditation is finally allowing you to feel the fears you have been carrying all along, but have been too busy to notice. This is a sign of progress, not failure. It means the practice is working. The snow is settling. The water is beginning to clear. Over time, as the practice deepens, something begins to shift. The fears that once seemed so solid and so real begin to look different. You start to notice their impermanence. A thought of worry arises, and you watch it, and it passes. An old anxiety surfaces, and instead of being gripped by it, you observe it with a gentle curiosity, and it softens. The physical sensations of fear, the tightness in the chest, the knot in the belly, the shallowness of the breath, become objects of investigation rather than overwhelming experiences. You begin to develop what the Buddhist tradition calls mindfulness of the body, a moment-to-moment awareness of physical sensations that anchors you in the present and prevents the mind from spinning off into its familiar cycles of projection and catastrophe. The body is an extraordinary resource in the practice of working with fear, because while the mind can travel to the future and the past, generating fears about events that have not happened and replaying terrors that are long over, the body is always in the present. The sensation of your feet on the floor is happening now. The weight of your hands in your lap is happening now. The air moving in and out of your nostrils is happening now. When you bring your attention to these physical sensations, you are not trying to escape from fear. You are simply returning to the only place where reality actually exists, this moment. Walking meditation, a practice in which you move slowly and deliberately, bringing your full attention to the sensation of each step, is particularly powerful for working with fear. Thich Nhat Hanh taught that every step taken in mindfulness is a step taken on the path to freedom. When your foot touches the earth, you are making contact with something solid, something real, something that is not a projection of the anxious mind. The earth has been here for 4.5 billion years. It has held the weight of dinosaurs and volcanoes and ice ages and civilizations. It can hold the weight of your fear. There is a practice from the Plum Village tradition, the community founded by Thich Nhat Hanh, called the 5 Remembrances. It is a meditation on impermanence that is deliberately designed to bring the practitioner face to face with the very truths that generate the deepest fear, not in order to increase that fear, but in order to dissolve its power through direct, honest acknowledgement. The 5 remembrances are: I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. Reading these words, your first reaction might be dread. These are the truths that most of us spend our entire lives trying not to think about. They are the source of our deepest, most primal fears. And the Buddhist response to them is not to look away, but to look directly, with clear eyes and an open heart, and to do so every single day. The remarkable thing about this practice is that it works. People who regularly contemplate the 5 remembrances consistently report that their fear of aging, illness, death, and loss actually decreases over time. Not because they have become morbid or resigned, but because they have stopped pretending. They have stopped living in the fantasy of permanence and started living in the reality of change. And reality, it turns out, is far less frightening than the fantasies we construct to avoid it. Because here is the deepest secret of the Buddhist teaching on fear. What you are really afraid of is not death, or loss, or failure, or humiliation. What you are really afraid of is the truth. The truth that you are impermanent. The truth that you are not in control. The truth that the solid ground you have been standing on was never solid. The truth that the self you have been defending was never the fixed, permanent, independent entity you believed it to be. And the paradox, the beautiful, liberating, astonishing paradox, is that the moment you stop running from this truth and turn to face it, it does not destroy you. It sets you free. Consider the lotus flower, one of the most enduring symbols in Buddhist art and literature. The lotus grows in muddy water. Its roots are sunk deep in the muck at the bottom of the pond. And yet the blossom that emerges is pristine, luminous, untouched by the mud from which it grew. The mud is not the enemy of the lotus. The mud is its nourishment. Without the mud, there would be no flower. Your fear is the mud. It is not pleasant. It is not something you would choose, but it is the raw material from which your freedom grows. Every moment of fear that you have ever experienced, every night of insomnia, every panic attack, every paralyzing anxiety, every quiet dread that colored an otherwise beautiful day, all of it is compost for the flower of awakening. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is meaningless. Even the worst of your suffering has a purpose, if you are willing to sit with it long enough and look at it clearly enough to discover what that purpose is. The Zen master Dogen, the founder of the Soto Zen school in Japan, wrote that to study the way is to study the self, and to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. This is the trajectory of the path. You begin by looking inward, examining the thoughts and feelings and fears that make up your inner landscape. Then, through sustained practice, you begin to see through the illusion of a separate self. And when that illusion dissolves, what remains is not nothingness, but everything. A world that is vivid and luminous and astonishingly beautiful, experienced by an awareness that is no longer contracted by fear, but is open, spacious, and free. You do not have to become a monk to walk this path. You do not have to move to a monastery or give up your possessions or sit in meditation for 8 hours a day. The Buddhist tradition offers practices that can be woven into the fabric of an ordinary life. A few minutes of mindful breathing in the morning, a moment of metta practice before bed, a walking meditation during your lunch break, a brief pause to notice the feeling tone of your experience before you react to it. The key is not the quantity of practice, but the quality of attention. One truly mindful breath, one moment of genuine presence, is worth more than an hour of distracted sitting. And over time, these moments of presence accumulate. They build on each other. They create new neural pathways in the brain, new habits of mind, new ways of relating to the storms that life inevitably brings. And one day, perhaps sooner than you expect, you will find yourself in a situation that would once have triggered paralyzing fear, and instead of the familiar panic, you will feel something else entirely. You will feel spacious. You will feel clear. You will feel, for perhaps the first time in your life, genuinely free. Not free from difficulty, not free from challenge, not free from the inevitable pain of being human, but free from the unnecessary suffering that comes from fighting the truth. Free from the prison of a mind that is always at war with reality. Free from the exhausting, futile, soul-crushing effort of trying to make the impermanent permanent, the uncertain certain, the uncontrollable controllable. This is the freedom the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree. This is the freedom that has been transmitted from teacher to student for 100 generations, across a dozen cultures, through countless languages and forms. This is the freedom that is available to you right now, in this moment, exactly as you are, with all your fears and all your flaws and all your beautiful, messy, impermanent humanity. So how do we take all of this, the ancient wisdom, the modern science, the stories, the practices, and bring it into the texture of our daily lives? How do we actually walk through the fire of fear and come out the other side? The first step, and every Buddhist teacher agrees on this, is simply to notice. Before you can work with fear, you have to see it. And one of the most insidious things about chronic fear is that it operates below the level of conscious awareness. It disguises itself as common sense, or being realistic, or being careful. It becomes so familiar that it feels like part of who you are, like the background hum of a refrigerator that you have stopped hearing because it has been running for so long. Mindfulness meditation is the practice of noticing. You sit down, you close your eyes or lower your gaze. You bring your attention to the sensation of breathing, and you watch. You watch what the mind does. You observe the endless parade of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and impulses that move through your awareness like clouds moving across the sky. And sooner or later, you will notice fear. It might appear as a tightness in your chest, a knot in your stomach, a constriction in your throat. It might appear as a thought, what if something goes wrong? Or, I am not good enough, or something bad is going to happen. It might appear as an urge to check your phone, to eat something, to get up and do something, anything, to avoid sitting with whatever is arising. The Buddhist teacher Michael Grady, who has been practicing insight meditation for decades, suggests a simple technique. When you notice fear arising, gently label it with the mental note, fear, fear. He is careful to explain that this noting is not meant to create distance from the experience. It is meant to bring you more fully into the present, while helping you recognize that fear is a conditioned process, something that arises and passes away, something that is not you, not yours, not who you are. Seeing quite directly the impermanence of fear as it arises and passes away, Grady writes, frees us gradually from the constrictive hold of identifying with it. This is the key move. As long as you believe that your fear is you, that it defines you, that it is a permanent feature of your identity, you are trapped. But the moment you can observe it as a temporary mental event, something that appeared and will disappear, just like every other mental event you have ever experienced, in that moment the prison door swings open. The second step is to investigate. Once you have noticed fear, do not run from it. Turn toward it. Get curious about it. Where do you feel it in your body? What is its quality? Is it hot or cold, sharp or dull, expanding or contracting? What thoughts accompany it? What memories does it bring up? What beliefs underlie it? The Zen teacher Ajahn Sumedho offers a beautifully practical suggestion for this investigation. When fear arises, he advises saying to yourself, anxiety is like this. Fear is like this. Not, I am anxious or I am afraid. Because those phrases reinforce the identification with fear. Instead, a simple, objective observation. This is what fear feels like. This subtle shift in language, from subject to observer, from victim to witness, can be the difference between being consumed by fear and being free of it. The third step is to breathe. This is not a platitude. The breath is the single most powerful tool you have for regulating your nervous system, and it is available to you at every moment of every day. When fear triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, the breath becomes shallow and rapid. By consciously slowing and deepening the breath, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural calming mechanism. Thich Nhat Hanh developed a breathing practice specifically for working with fear. Breathing in, I know that anxiety is in me. Breathing out, I smile to my anxiety. The act of smiling, even gently, even when you do not feel like it, has been shown to affect the brain's emotional processing centers. Combined with conscious breathing, it creates a physiological state that is incompatible with the full-blown fear response. The fourth step is to question. Ask yourself, is this fear based on something that is actually happening right now, in this moment? Or is it based on a projection about the future or a memory of the past? If you are honest, you will find that in the vast majority of cases, your fear is about something that is not actually occurring. It is a mental rehearsal of a catastrophe that exists only in your imagination. The Japanese warrior who was captured and thrown into prison, unable to sleep because he feared torture and execution the next day, remembered the words of his Zen master. Tomorrow is not real. It is an illusion. The only reality is now. This is not a denial of the possibility of future danger. It is a recognition that the fear of future danger is a present moment suffering that is entirely self-generated. The fifth step, and perhaps the most transformative, is to let go. Not to let go of fear itself, because trying to let go of fear is just another form of fighting it. Let go of the need for things to be different than they are. Let go of the demand for certainty. Let go of the insistence that you must be safe, must be in control, must know what is going to happen next. This is the practice of what Pema Chodron calls relaxing with groundlessness. It is the willingness to stand on shifting sand and not demand that the sand become solid. It is the courage to say, I do not know what is going to happen, and that is okay. It is the radical trust that whatever arises, you have the inner resources to meet it, not because you are invulnerable, but because you are present, because you are aware, because you have trained your mind to respond to difficulty with clarity rather than panic. All of the teachings we have explored tonight, the Buddha's confrontation with Mara, the Zen stories of fearless monks, the science of the amygdala, the wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron, the practice of loving kindness, they all converge on a single, stunning insight. The freedom you are looking for is not somewhere else. It is not in the future. It is not dependent on your circumstances changing. It is right here, right now, in this very moment, waiting for you to notice it. Fear tells you otherwise. Fear says you must achieve something first, fix something first, become something first, before you can be at peace. Fear says the world is dangerous and you are not equipped to handle it. Fear says that if you stop worrying, something terrible will happen. Fear says that if you let go, you will fall. But here is what the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree, what every awakened being throughout history has discovered in their own way. When you let go, you do not fall. You fly. Not literally, of course. The Buddhist path is not about magical powers or supernatural abilities. It is about something much more extraordinary than that. It is about the discovery that the ordinary human mind, the mind that has been plaguing you with fears and worries and anxieties since the day you were born, that very mind, when it is trained and understood and met with compassion, is capable of a peace that is beyond anything you have ever imagined. The Zen tradition speaks of this with characteristic directness. It has been said that if you have Zen in your life, you have no fear, no doubt, no unnecessary craving, and no extreme emotion. Neither illiberal attitudes nor egotistical actions trouble you. You serve humanity humbly, fulfilling your presence in this world with loving kindness and observing your passing as a petal falling from a flower. Serene, you enjoy life in blissful tranquility. This is not a fairy tale. This is not an unattainable ideal reserved for monks in mountain monasteries. This is a description of what happens when a human being does the work of facing their fear, understanding it, and letting it go. It is a description of what you can become, not through belief, not through hope, through practice. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." When it comes to fear, most of us have become experts. We know our fears intimately. We have cataloged them and classified them and built our entire lives around avoiding them. We have become so skilled at being afraid that we have forgotten what it feels like to be free. The invitation of the Buddhist path is to become a beginner again, to approach your fear with the curiosity and openness of someone encountering it for the first time, to sit with it, breathe with it, investigate it, and discover for yourself what every awakened being has discovered. That fear, when you look at it closely, when you really look, is made of nothing. It is smoke without fire. It is a shadow cast by a candle that has already gone out. You have been carrying this burden for so long. You have been lugging it up every hill, dragging it through every valley, clutching it to your chest as if it were something precious, as if without it you would be lost. But it is not precious. It is a weight that is crushing you, and you can set it down. Right now, in this moment, you can set it down, not because the world has suddenly become safe. The world has never been safe, not in the way your fear demands. Not because you have figured everything out. You will never figure everything out, and you do not need to. But because you have begun to see, perhaps for the first time, that the one who is afraid and the fear itself are not separate, and that both are temporary, and that beneath both, like the sky behind the clouds, there is a vast, open, luminous awareness that has never been afraid of anything. That awareness is your true nature. It has been here all along, patient, unshakable, quietly holding space for all the storms of your life. Fear could not touch it. Loss could not diminish it. Time could not erode it, because it is not a thing that can be threatened. It is the space in which all things arise and pass away. And you are that space. You have always been that space. You were that space before your first fear, and you will be that space after your last. The only thing that has changed, the only thing that ever needed to change, is that now you know it. So as you prepare to close your eyes tonight, or as you continue through whatever moment this reaches you, carry with you the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, as simple and true as a stone at the bottom of a clear stream. Fearlessness is not only possible, it is the ultimate joy. When you touch non-fear, you are free. You are free. You have always been free. The cage was never locked. The walls were never real. The only thing between you and the life you were born to live is a thought that you can choose, in this very moment, to set down and walk away from. Breathe in. You are here. Breathe out. You are free. And that, dear friends, is not just a Buddhist teaching. It is the truth about who you are. If this journey spoke to something in you tonight, if it touched a place that needed touching, if it offered even a moment of peace in the middle of whatever storms you may be facing, I would be deeply grateful if you would hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Every time you do, you help us reach someone else who might be lying awake at 3 in the morning, someone else who might need to hear that fear is not what they think it is, someone else who might be ready to set down the burden they have been carrying and step into the vast, open, luminous freedom that has been waiting for them all along. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And above all, thank you for having the courage to look at your fear, because that, more than anything else, is the first step on the path to becoming free.